Welcome to my channel. If you love thrilling fanfiction stories, you're in the right place. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing content. Now, let's dive into the world of imagination.
Prophet? Prophet Harry? Please wake up. We need your guidance. It was as if he was surfacing from deep underwater. The voices calling to him seemed muffled, as though they were coming through a layer of swelling bubbles. Indistinct yet oddly clear enough to pierce his ears. The sound sent a shiver through Harry. He abruptly opened his eyes, but the next second, Harry doubted whether he was truly awake or still dreaming. The surface beneath him wasn't the soft hide of a beast. There was no crackling of firewood burning in the brazier, and the usual aroma of burnt spices that lingered in his home was entirely absent. Instead, the air was filled with a musty stench. There was no sunlight, or rather, the only illumination came from a faint glow seeping through the thin cracks of a nearby wooden door. After a few seconds of adjustment, Harry finally took in his surroundings. It was cramped, dim, and so narrow that he couldn't even stand upright. Stretching out both arms would have him touching the walls on either side. Above his head were layers upon layers of steps, constructed from dark gray cement. Wait, steps? Fragments of memories, long buried, forgotten, dismissed as childhood fantasies, began to resurface in his mind. This place, could it be real? Had he returned to what he once considered home? His aunt and uncle's house? What was it called again? Earth? Was this real or fake? Harry stared blankly at his hands, thin and frail, with bones clearly visible beneath the skin. It looked as though a mere fall could break them. All the muscles he had built up over years of training were gone, vanished without a trace. Harry instinctively pinched his arm, finding it hard to believe that, in his current state, he'd probably lose a fight against a stray cub. With the utmost care, afraid of snapping a limb by accident, Harry slowly stood up and pushed open the door beside him. White walls, a hallway leading into what looked like a living room, or perhaps a dining area. On the mantelpiece were numerous photographs. Harry examined them closely. A chubby boy riding a bicycle, the same boy on a carousel, but not a single photo of himself. Harry rummaged through his memories. Yes, he remembered now, this was his cousin, and his presence in this house had always been systematically erased, as though he didn't exist. Everything Harry saw in the house stirred long-forgotten memories, bringing them back into sharp focus. It all felt so real that it made him question whether everything he had experienced was just a dream. The whispers of the elements, the secrets hidden by spirits, the temptations and howls of demons, the blood spilled on the battlefield, the shouts of his comrades. Could all those vivid memories, the physical pain, and the power he wielded have been nothing more than an incredibly realistic dream? It was hard not to entertain such doubts when his physical body was here, solid and responsive, his thoughts crystal clear. Yet Harry remained equally convinced that everything he experienced in Azeroth was real. Because Harry raised his hand, and in his open palm, a thin, translucent stream of water coiled like a serpent, gliding nimbly between his fingers. Though faint and sluggish, as if dormant, the elements of this world still answered his call. In addition, Harry could still feel the magic within him, though even Jaina couldn't pinpoint its origins. Yet, when he channeled this power into shamanic arts, it worked remarkably well. The elements seemed to appreciate it. And beyond these tangible changes, Harry's keen senses, heightened awareness, and the marks the elements had left on him, all remained. The scars of war were still etched into his body, just as they had been in that other world. Nothing was different except his age, which had regressed, and his body, which had returned to that of an 11-year-old. I don't recall stepping through any unstable portal, Harry muttered to himself. From his experience, portals created by mages rarely ended well, especially those opened by certain mischievous individuals who thought it amusing to link them to places like the ruined Tauren crater, giving people an impromptu skydiving lesson. Harry could only say that survival instincts had kicked in during that ordeal, and he had later ensured the offending mage learned their lesson. Considering how often mages, much like goblins, came up with unpredictable creations, It wasn't entirely surprising that Harry had been mysteriously sent back to this world, with his age reversed as a bonus. Time travel? In Azeroth's tangled timelines, Harry had grown accustomed to it. He'd even attended a celebration hosted by the Bronze Dragons, where composure was key no matter how strange things got. For example, in the Peculiar World, a realm populated entirely by Murloc versions of people he knew, Harry had kept his cool. Harry nodded to himself. But now, the real question was, how could he return? He longed for his small home in Thunderbluff, built with the help of his father, Cairn Bloodhoof, and his older brother Bane. It was a cozy space tailored to his size, a place he considered his true home. When Harry, once a frail and clueless child, had ended up stranded in Kalimdor, it was Cairn Bloodhoof who had taken him in, guided him, and cared for him. He had taught Harry how to live, not as a human, but as a Tauren. Even though Cairn was a Tauren and Harry a human, there had been no distinction in the way he was treated. In fact, Harry sometimes thought of himself as a peculiar kind of Tauren, one whose horns had yet to grow and whose fur was a bit sparse. So, where could he find a mage to open a portal for him? Harry fell into deep thought. Crash! Just then, a sudden clatter behind him broke his concentration. Turning around, Harry saw a plump, middle-aged man struggling to get up from the floor, his face a mixture of panic and fury. Oh, and anger. Definitely anger. You little brat. I warned you already. The man roared, his face flushed red with rage, his entire body seeming to swell with fury. No magic. No freakish, disgusting magic in this house. After a few false starts, the man finally spat out a description for what he had witnessed. You mean this, uncle? Harry raised his hand, and the water snake coiled between his fingers moved more energetically in response. He was beginning to remember who this man was, his uncle Vernon. I told you not to do that, boy. To Vernon, the livelier movements of the water snake were a deliberate provocation. He roared, charging at Harry like a tank, one hand reaching directly for Harry's hair. Bang! The sound was sharp and solid, the kind of noise that made one wince just imagining the pain. It was the unmistakable thud of flesh meeting an unyielding surface. Vernon's face turned an even deeper shade of red, though this time it wasn't from anger or fear, but from the sheer agony coursing through him. For the moment, however, Vernon was too preoccupied to hurl insults at his typically timid nephew. His eyes shrank to tiny points, much like a beetle's, wide with horror as they fixed on the thing that had stopped his hand mid-swing. A shield? Or had the wall itself just moved? When Vernon had lunged at Harry, hand outstretched to grab his hair, Harry had instinctively rejected the hostile action. Without thinking, he'd used one of the most common spells in a shaman's repertoire, the Earth Shield. The intent was fine, the spell itself executed perfectly. The issue lay in where the material for the shield had come from. The wall next to where Harry and Vernon were standing now bore a gaping hole. Actually, to be precise, it no longer resembled a wall at all. Chunks of concrete and brick seemed to have taken on a life of their own, surging together to form a protective shield large enough to cover Harry completely. Monster! Vernon screamed reflexively, his voice shrill, matching the screech that had come earlier from the direction of the kitchen. Harry turned his head toward the sound and saw a woman clutching a spatula, her hands pressed to her head as she let out piercing shrieks. It was his aunt, Petunia. The sight of her ruined home, evidence of her nephew's unwanted antics, seemed to stun her into a moment of horrified clarity. The thought of her spotless reputation now at the mercy of the neighbors' gossip threatened to make her faint on the spot. Harry, what are you doing? Petunia shrieked. Today is Dudley's birthday, and the neighbors. They'll see us. Well, Harry mused inwardly. At least she remembers her son's birthday amidst all this chaos. That's some impressive maternal focus. Still, these weren't the most pressing matters. No, the real issue was that if Harry's calculations were correct, this house wasn't going to hold together much longer. After all, the Earth Shield had pulled its material directly from the house's load-bearing wall. Not just punctured it, obliterated it entirely. Harry glanced around. The walls nearby were already trembling, small cracks spidering outward ominously. The commotion downstairs had clearly roused someone from their slumber. From above came a thunderous stomping, and soon, a pajama-clad boy with a nightcap perched on his head appeared at the top of the stairs. "Dad, you're being so loud. What's going—" "Oh my God!" Harry recognized the boy immediately. The photographs he'd seen earlier had been filled with this round-faced individual. This was Dudley, his cousin, whose long-forgotten antics had once left Harry bruised and battered. Dudley, however, seemed far more interested than horrified. His eyes lit up as he surveyed the scene below. "This is so cool!" he shouted, his voice reverberating through the shaking walls. "What kind of game is this?" "It's clearly not a game," Harry sighed. In some ways, Dudley was exactly as Harry remembered him, brash, excitable, and utterly oblivious. But for Harry, who had lived through more than 30 years' worth of experiences, his cousin's past behavior seemed like trivial squabbles between children, a harmless calf at best. "My house!" Petunia's shrill cry cut through Harry's thoughts. The pristine white walls were now riddled with cracks, and the house itself was trembling on its last legs. The cacophony of Petunia's screams, Vernon's roars, and Dudley's exclamations made Harry's head throb. It reminded him of the noisy meetings held by orcs, boisterous, unruly, and loud enough to rattle one's brain. But regardless of the chaos, Harry couldn't just let anyone get hurt. And so, in Little Whinging, Surrey, at number 4, Privet Drive, a plume of dust rose high into the air as the once immaculate house, standing for over a decade, crumbled into rubble, reduced to a heap of debris in a cloud of gray smoke. Well, not entirely rubble. Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley were all sprawled on the ground, groaning as they tried to push themselves upright. Moments before the collapse, a torrent of water had swept them to Harry's side. Now they sat in stunned silence, staring at the nephew they had barely acknowledged in the past. Or more accurately, they were staring at the massive, towering figure standing protectively over them. A golem of sorts. It was a hulking giant, cobbled together from the remnants of the house. Shattered concrete, steel rebar, and bricks all melded into one colossal body. If this were Azeroth, Harry mused, the creature would surely have an appropriately grand name. Something like Concrete Earth Elemental or Brickwork Titan. Whatever it was called, its massive arms and body had shielded them all from the collapse, ensuring no one was harmed. "Sorry about that, Uncle Vernon," Harry said with a sigh. He turned to face his still-stunned relatives. "I didn't expect the magic here to draw directly from the surrounding earth, rather than tapping into the elemental plane. I'll compensate for the damage caused." Vernon didn't respond. He didn't rage, didn't shout, didn't even flinch. He just stood there, frozen in shock, his face blank and uncomprehending. The term stunned silence had never felt more apt. Crack. Pop. Harry's attention was drawn away as a series of sharp, crackling sounds erupted. Beyond the rubble of the house, figures began materializing in the street, not walking out of portals or gates. No, these people appeared out of thin air, dressed in long robes, their wands clutched tightly in hand. The sudden appearance of people on the street caught Harry's attention, especially the way they materialized silently and without warning. Most of them seemed shocked as they landed, many pointing directly at him. Harry keenly noticed that their focus was actually on him, or rather, it seemed these people already knew of him and were aware of his existence. Yet Harry had no recollection of them at all. Was it because of his biological parents? Or was there some other reason? Harry felt he might finally uncover the truth, something connected to the peculiar magical power within him. A house collapsing in a thunderous crash was undoubtedly an attention-grabbing event. By now, the other residents of the street had started poking their heads out, curious to approach number 4, Privet Drive, to see what had happened. However, under Harry's watchful gaze, a portion of the people who had appeared out of nowhere on the street began moving. They waved small wooden sticks, each about the length of a forearm, at those approaching to investigate. Almost immediately, it was as if the curious onlookers had forgotten about the commotion altogether, turning back naturally. Even cars stopped passing by the area. Unlike the usual attire of the people in Harry's memory of this world, these sudden arrivals wore long robes, and some even had pointed hats, reminiscent of the wizards in fairy tales. Harry didn't have much time to observe or reflect. Soon, an elderly man with white hair and a matching beard appeared out of thin air. His arrival noticeably eased the tension among the crowd. Before his appearance, many of these strangers had been glancing at Harry with fear in their eyes, their nerves taut like strings about to snap. A man wearing a bowler hat hurried over to the old man, his face filled with unease. "Not a Muggle-born incident, Dumbledore. Thank goodness it isn't. Calm down, Cornelius. Leave this to me." The ever-present wind carried their words to Harry's ears. Noticing the oddity of the breeze, Harry observed that the white-bearded man seemed to notice it too. He turned briefly toward the air before walking toward Harry. "May we have a chat, child?" the bearded man said with a warm smile. "Don't be afraid. We mean no harm. In fact, it's wonderful to see you're unharmed." The man carefully examined Harry from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the concrete giant that had shielded Harry and his relatives from the collapse. His eyes sparkled with amazement. "Of course, sir," Harry replied softly. At his words, the concrete elemental began to curl up, and within seconds, it crumbled into an unremarkable pile of rubble, indistinguishable from ordinary debris. It looked as if it had always been just that. The faintly settled dust rose into the air again, but this time, the old man waved his wooden stick, and the dust vanished completely, as though it had never existed. So this was the magic of this world? Quite discreet, it should prove useful. Harry's eyes flickered with thought. It seemed the world he was born into wasn't as mundane as he'd remembered. The power of magic had hidden itself for reasons unknown. "Amazing magic," the old man marveled. "Please forgive my curiosity. How did you do it?" "I don't know, sir," Harry lied without a flicker of emotion. "I didn't expect it to happen." Well, it wasn't entirely a lie. After all, Harry truly hadn't anticipated that casting shamanic magic in this world would draw directly from the surrounding environment instead of from the elemental realms of wind, fire, earth, and water. This peculiarity had caused the Dursleys' house to be destroyed. To be honest, Harry felt a bit guilty about it. "Fascinating magic. Truly fascinating," the old man said with a kindly smile. "At the very least, I've never seen anything quite like it. Could I trouble you to demonstrate it again?" As he spoke, he playfully winked. It was clear this man was skilled at dealing with children. An average 11-year-old might have been flattered by such praise, forgetting their fear and hesitation, and eager to show off. Unfortunately, Harry was no ordinary child. "I'm afraid I can't, sir," Harry said, lowering his head to look at his hands. "They're not responding anymore." This was the truth. The elemental energy in this world was even less active than Harry had imagined. His earlier act of conjuring the earth elemental had apparently drained the area's energy further, rendering it inert for the time being. The elements hadn't told Harry why this dormancy occurred, but he planned to investigate after regaining more of his strength. For now, he was too weak to do anything recklessly. "I see," the old man said, sighing in genuine disappointment. He seemed to fully believe Harry's explanation. "What a pity, but life is long, and it's always a joy to witness something new. If you ever..." Monster! It seemed that, after some time to recover, Vernon had finally regained his senses. He let out a short, piercing scream. "Gone! My house is gone! The house turned into a monster. The monster protected me from being crushed by the house. All of it is monstrous." Overwhelmed, Vernon's words tumbled out in a jumbled mess before abruptly stopping. Not because he had calmed down, but because the old man waved his wooden stick again. In fact, it wasn't just Vernon. Petunia and Dudley also collapsed into unconsciousness in an instant. Without a word, Harry quickly turned to check their breathing. After confirming they were merely asleep, he faced the old man once more. "Don't worry, child," the old man said kindly, his smile radiating warmth. Harry's actions seemed to please him. "They just need some rest. When they wake up, all the bad things will be gone." What do you mean? Harry asked, glancing around with a sigh. I doubt my uncle will forgive me, and I'm afraid it'll take some time before he can receive my compensation. Just looking at the ruins was enough for Harry to know his aunt and uncle would be furious, especially Petunia. The mere thought of their neighbors gossiping behind their backs would likely make her faint, to say nothing of the financial loss. Oh, it's not as serious as all that. The old man with the white beard chuckled heartily at Harry's words. Your family, after all, connected by blood. There's no such thing as an eternal grudge between relatives. Like I said, things haven't reached the point of no return. You've already shown me a fascinating bit of magic, haven't you? The white-bearded old man blinked playfully, like a child. Now it's my turn. With that, he waved his peculiar, jointed little wand once again, a weapon Harry now recognized as the trademark of this world's mages, all of them with a similar design. A little wand. Yet, for now, the nature of the weapon wasn't the main point. What mattered was what happened next. Under Harry's gaze, the surrounding rubble and ruins began to move again. Not driven by elemental power, but as though they had come to life. No, more precisely, it felt as though time itself was reversing. Collapsed fragments of walls reassembled themselves into their original positions. Shattered concrete and bricks molded by elemental forces reverted to their prior forms. The walls turned pristine white again, even restoring the childish drawings Dudley had once scrawled on them. Stains and marks of time reappeared exactly as they had been. The furniture, the tables and chairs, the broken bowls and plates, the ruined television and appliances. Everything Harry could see seemed to rewind from its damaged state back to how it had been before. Finally, what stood before Harry was a complete, undamaged house, just as he had seen it when he stepped out of the cupboard under the stairs that very morning. The street outside was empty of passers-by. The fireplace crackled warmly, its flames snapping and popping. Everything seemed utterly normal, as though nothing had happened. Nothing at all. Clap, clap, clap. Harry couldn't help but applaud. Honestly, even with his experiences in another world, the magic this old man displayed was so astonishing. It was like the magic of all magic. Back in Stormwind, if the mages had been capable of such feats, the city wouldn't have needed rebuilding, and there wouldn't have been all those issues with unpaid stonemasons leading to the Brotherhood's rebellion. Amazing! Harry exclaimed, clapping enthusiastically. Truly amazing. The old man, who was far livelier than his age suggested, placed one hand on his stomach and spread the other outward, bowing to his sides and forward as though taking a curtain call at the end of a performance. Thank you, thank you. His poor old back must have been suffering for it. Well then, Harry? The old man chuckled as he put away his wand, gesturing toward the sofa. Forgive this old fellow for meddling. Just now might have been a bit beyond my usual stretching exercises. If you don't mind, why don't we sit down and have a chat? Harry noticed the old man seemed oddly familiar, either in personality or because he knew one of Harry's relatives very well. As Harry watched, the fridge door in the kitchen swung open on its own, and out floated a few desserts Dudley hadn't liked and left behind. The kettle filled itself with water and hopped onto the stove, boiling within seconds. Teacups danced their way to the table hand in hand, already holding tea leaves. When the hot water poured in, the fragrant aroma of milk tea wafted into Harry's nose. Incredible, Harry said sincerely once again. This display of magic was even more refined than anything the Kirin Tor could manage in Dalaran. Have a seat, Harry, the old man said warmly. Oh, don't worry about your relatives. When they wake up, it'll be as if nothing ever happened. All the unpleasant memories erased. Just like a bad dream. You tampered with their memories? Harry frowned. Memory was always a sensitive topic. Harry wouldn't want anyone prying into his cherished recollections, nor would he want anyone meddling with them. Do you think they'd want to remember any of this? The old man countered. Recalling Vernon's panicked meltdown, Harry hesitated for a moment before nodding, deciding not to pursue the matter further. Although it's a bit late for this now, I think basic introductions are still in order. Don't you, Harry? The old man smiled kindly. Allow me to introduce myself. Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Leaning forward slightly, Dumbledore extended his hand. Harry Potter, as you already know. Though taken aback by the old man's perceptiveness and the respect he offered despite his age, Harry responded with proper etiquette, shaking the extended hand. A magic school? Was it like Tauren at its inception? A place for teaching magic? Or was it more akin to the Kirin Tor? Indeed, a magic school, Dumbledore said, leaning back into his seat with a playful wink. Although it sounds a bit boastful, I must say that Hogwarts is undoubtedly the finest magic school in all of Europe. The finest in Europe, which meant there were other schools. So, unlike Tauren, it wasn't tied to political alliances? Harry pondered this silently but betrayed no reaction outwardly. Oh, right, Dumbledore exclaimed, as if suddenly recalling something. He began rummaging through his robes. To be honest, Harry had been holding back a comment for a while. Dumbledore's attire, a purple robe adorned with silver moons and stars, was certainly striking. Was this the standard aesthetic for wizards in this world? But no, that couldn't be. The people he'd seen earlier on the street hadn't been dressed like this. Aha! Found it! As Harry mulled over this, Dumbledore finally produced what he'd been searching for. From a hidden pocket inside his robe, he pulled out a letter sealed with red wax and handed it to Harry. Good thing I had one with me, or it would have been a shame for a young wizard to miss out. Wizard? Harry raised an eyebrow as he took the letter. Not a mage. Yes, a wizard. Dumbledore chuckled, his eyes twinkling. Just like the wizards and witches in Muggle fairy tales. I assume you've heard some of those stories? Oh, and by the way, Muggle is our term for people who can't use magic. Maybe, Harry muttered noncommittally, glancing down at the envelope in his hands. To Mr. Harry Potter, the living room by the coffee table, for Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The letter pinpointed his exact location at this moment, which left Harry somewhat skeptical about the capabilities of this world's so-called wizards. After all, just a few minutes ago, for Privet Drive had no such thing as a coffee table in its living room. He opened the letter. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, International Confederation of Wizards. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Await my owl? Harry looked up, puzzled. That's how wizards send messages? Oh yes, owls are remarkably intelligent creatures and have served as messengers for wizards for centuries. Dumbledore replied with a serene smile. They rarely make mistakes. Perhaps you'll want one as a pet someday. For now, though, you can just tell me your answer directly. After all, I am the headmaster, am I not? Ha 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 ha. Dumbledore laughed heartily at his own joke, clearly amused. I thought you might use something more magical for communication, Harry mused, recalling the messengers he'd seen back in Tauren. Those ranged from spectral servants to arcane constructs, or even beings that flew on their own wings. Compared to those, an owl delivering letters seemed far less magical and impressive. Such methods would indeed be more magical but far too conspicuous, Dumbledore said, shaking his head. As you might have noticed, the wizarding world is hidden. Breaking this secrecy would result in severe consequences under our laws. So, about today, Harry began, recalling the commotion he'd caused earlier. Oh, you have nothing to worry about, Dumbledore reassured him with a smile. You're just an untrained wizard, Harry. No one will punish a young wizard for instinctive magic. You're safe. Good to know, Harry nodded. I'm eager to attend the school, but I do have a couple of questions first. Go ahead, Dumbledore encouraged, reaching for his teacup, though I might need a little more sugar for this. First, your school probably isn't free, is it? My aunt and uncle certainly wouldn't want to spend money on a magic school, as you can see. Harry gestured toward the unconscious Dursleys sprawled on the floor. And they're not exactly fond of magic either. Thinking back on Dudley's earlier behavior, Harry reconsidered. Dudley wasn't opposed to magic so much as he wasn't the one in control this time. Don't worry about that, Dumbledore said, waving off Harry's concern. Hogwarts provides scholarships for Muggle-born wizards and those from disadvantaged families. But in your case, this won't be necessary. Straightening up, Dumbledore locked eyes with Harry. You have an inheritance, left by your parents. It's more than enough to cover all your expenses at Hogwarts and beyond. My parents' inheritance? Harry's voice wavered, the unfamiliar yet familiar words striking a chord. Yes, Dumbledore affirmed, his tone gentle. Your mother, Lily, and your aunt, Petunia, were sisters. Due to reasons I can't fully explain right now, your bond of blood is why you've lived here all these years. Forgive my secrecy, Harry, he added, seeing Harry's urge to ask further. Some truths are not suited for a child to bear. Your parents' Gringotts vault key is in my keeping, and when the time comes, I'll ensure someone guides you into the magical world. For now, Dumbledore said with a mischievous grin, let's keep a few mysteries intact, shall we? Discovery is part of the fun. All right? Harry relented, aware that arguing about his maturity wasn't worth it. His 11-year-old body didn't exactly help his case. One more question. Does Hogwarts accept non-human students? Dumbledore froze mid-sip. Pardon? He asked cautiously, wondering if he'd misheard. Like werewolves, giants, vampires, or maybe mushroom people. Fungus folk. Harry tilted his head. Would they be discriminated against or outright banned? I'm not sure I understand, Dumbledore admitted, clearly puzzled. Hogwarts wouldn't allow dark creatures like werewolves or vampires to enroll, of course. As for mushroom people, if they exist, we haven't found them yet. Ah, I see, Harry said, visibly disappointed. In that case, I might not be able to attend after all. Dumbledore? ? Even with over a century of life experience, Dumbledore found himself baffled. I'm fairly certain your parents were human, Harry, he said slowly, setting his teacup down. Human wizards, to be precise. No, I'm a Tauren, Harry declared firmly. My horns haven't grown in yet, and I'm still a bit short on fur, but I'm definitely Tauren. Dumbledore? After a long pause, Dumbledore sighed, the weight of his teaching years settling on him. Well then, rest assured, Taurens are welcome at Hogwarts. That's a relief, Harry said, smiling for the first time. Dumbledore didn't linger much longer. After handing over the admission letter and promising someone would guide Harry into the wizarding world, he left for Privet Drive. There were, as he explained, many matters to address after the day's events. Harry understood. In a society bound by secrecy laws, the uproar he'd caused was likely a big deal. But Dumbledore's words left much unanswered, particularly why those wizards at the start seemed to recognize him. Their astonishment and curiosity had been palpable, as if he were some extraordinary figure. Yet Harry knew for certain he hadn't made a name for himself in this world. He'd have to uncover the truth in due time. Adding a log to the fireplace, Harry settled back by the coffee table, sipping tea. His nerves, taut from the day's encounters, finally began to ease. Truthfully, he hadn't been around this many humans in years, not in private, at least. It was overwhelming, especially in his weakened state. Harry Potter, shaman and seer of the Horde, was not human. He was Tauren, a truth universally acknowledged within the Horde. You're awake, Aunt Petunia? Harry asked, breaking the crackling silence. He glanced at the sofa, where his relatives lay. How are you feeling? Petunia sat up slowly, clutching her head. Her face bore traces of a nightmare. Visions of neighbors jeering, their house collapsing. As her gaze swept the room, reality reassured her. Everything seemed normal. Dreams were just dreams, until her eyes landed on the envelope by Harry's side, its crest unmistakable. No, she groaned, covering her eyes as though to block out the sight of the Hogwarts seal. A shield emblazoned with an H, flanked by a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. "Can we talk, Aunt Petunia?" Harry asked softly. "About my mother." Petunia stared blankly at the letter, then at Harry. "You too. I knew it. I knew it." Muttering under her breath, she sighed deeply after a long pause. "All right." For Harry, life had temporarily settled into a calm rhythm. He no longer had to endure the irritations caused by too many humans around him or worry about their intentions. After all, to his tribe, humans often meant insults, curses, or even drawn swords, usually culminating in bloodshed and death. That was just how Azeroth was. The war between the Horde and the Alliance never ceased. Since that day, no one had come to disrupt his life. In fact, after Aunt Petunia candidly confessed certain things about his mother, even his aunt and uncle's attitude toward him inexplicably improved over the following days. Harry didn't even have to sleep in the cupboard under the stairs anymore. Harry couldn't help but wonder what kind of memory modifications Dumbledore had performed on them. Aside from altering the memory of the house collapsing into a mere nightmare, had he done something else? Ultimately, Harry decided it wasn't worth overthinking. At least for now, things were fine, weren't they? Harry's days gradually began to improve. However, outside of Harry's quiet little bubble, the magical world was anything but calm. A flood of howlers was delivered to the Minister of Magic's office by owls, and even the headmaster's office at Hogwarts couldn't escape the bombardment. Dumbledore was under heavy fire for his supposed neglect of Harry Potter. Take this very moment, for instance. Only this time, the person berating Dumbledore wasn't a howler but a dark-robed man with a sallow, brooding countenance. "You promised me, Dumbledore." A newspaper was slammed onto the desk of the headmaster's office, its pages spread wide in righteous indignation. Spittle flew from the dark-robed man's lips, some landing in Dumbledore's silver beard. "You promised to take care of him, and this is what happens." "Oh, Severus, calm down. I seem to be telling people that a lot lately. Would you like some treacle pudding? Muggle desserts do have their charm." Completely unfazed by the man's fury, Dumbledore cheerfully pushed a plate of pudding toward him, only for it to be unceremoniously swept to the floor the next second. His anger burned uncontrollably in his chest. Living with cruel relatives, dressed like a house elf, skin and bones, and he nearly turned into an obscurial because of their abuse. Snape, the dark-robed man whom Dumbledore had addressed as Severus, jabbed the newspaper toward Dumbledore's face, his rage barely contained. "This is how you keep your promises? This is your care? Oh, my pudding." Dumbledore glanced mournfully at the dessert on the floor before sighing. "I must admit there's some truth in that report, Severus. But we both know what kind of person Rita Skeeter is. I don't mean to speak ill of her, but her credibility is questionable. Still," he added, his tone shifting as if lost in thought, "how exactly did she get her hands on this story? Fascinating." On the newspaper before them, beneath the bold heading of the Daily Prophet, the most eye-catching element was a massive photo on the front page. In the image, a boy stood amidst a pile of rubble, with a towering stone giant formed from the remains of the collapsed house. The boy, his expression calm, showing neither fear nor panic, stood resolute among the destruction. And below the photo, in bold, striking letters, was the headline, "Harry Potter, the next Dumbledore?" Based on this reporter's investigation, the boy who survived the Dark Lord's curse and led to his downfall has not been living well these past years. Not only is he physically frail compared to other boys his age, but his attire, please pardon my bluntness, makes him look like a pitiful house elf, forced to rise early and stand on a stool to cook breakfast for his Muggle relatives. Burdened with all the household chores, and frequently subjected to scolding and punishment, years of abuse by his Muggle relatives left the boy who lived in an oppressive environment. It was only in the days leading up to his 11th birthday that everything finally erupted, of course. According to interviews with ministry officials, we can confirm that our young boy did not turn into an obscurial. A magical outburst, ministry officials explained, similar to what every young wizard experiences in times of crisis. As the child who defeated him who must not be named, Harry Potter's magical outburst is naturally far greater than that of his peers. This is perfectly reasonable. That stone giant he conjured is impressive, something many adult wizards would struggle to achieve. As we enjoy the peace and stability of our world, brought about by the sacrifices of this boy's parents, we must ask ourselves, was it worth it? For the hero who gave us this life, what kind of life has he endured in return? In these 11 years, has the Ministry fulfilled its responsibility to Harry Potter after the death of his parents? And what about Dumbledore? Has he fulfilled his duty to the boy who lived? These questions demand reflection. The article appeared to adopt a neutral stance, presenting itself as an objective analysis, but its undertones clearly sought to absolve the Ministry of any blame, subtly steering public perception. Rita's writing is as engaging as ever, Dumbledore remarked after a brief pause. Her story certainly captures attention. Oh, and this photograph is excellent. Especially that moment she caught of me and young Harry gazing at each other amidst the ruins. I do wonder how she managed it. I don't care about that woman's self-made image, Dumbledore, Snape snarled. Her so-called bravery and truth-telling are irrelevant. What I care about are the facts, she reported. Harry Potter was nearly driven into becoming an obscurial by his Muggle relative's abuse. If this is your idea of taking care of the boy, then you should have handed him over to me 11 years ago. Let me take him to Spinner's End. Spinner's End was Snape's home, a clear indication he would have preferred to raise Harry himself. It was evident that Snape's anger had reached its peak. An obscurial, or more specifically the phenomenon of an obscurus, is a unique form of dark magic that manifests in young witches and wizards. When a child suffers physical or emotional abuse and consciously represses their magical abilities out of fear or trauma, an obscurus forms within them, making the child an obscurial. An obscurial lives in torment, and when their emotions spiral out of control, they transform into an obscurus, a destructive force capable of devastating everything in its path. Obscurials rarely survive past the age of 10, which explained the Ministry's panic when an unprecedented magical surge erupted from number 4, Privet Drive. The Ministry could not accept a future where Harry Potter became an obscurial. The boy was more than a symbol. He was the hero who had ended Voldemort's reign of terror, restoring peace to the wizarding world. Harry himself remained unaware of the fame that surrounded him. Yet, in this world, his name carried immense weight. This very reputation put the Ministry and the Minister under enormous pressure. Should Harry indeed become an obscurial, the fallout would go far beyond a mere resignation. Certain individuals might even face Azkaban. It was no surprise, then, that Dumbledore found himself under fire from a deluge of howlers. After all, he wasn't just a headmaster. Calm yourself, Severus, Dumbledore repeated, his voice steady. I have been watching over young Harry. While his life has been challenging, it has not reached a point where he might turn into an obscurial. Harry cannot grow up in the wizarding world. The fame and adoration would ruin him. This was the wisdom of an old man. And you and I both know, Severus, Dumbledore added softly, locking eyes with Snape. He is not truly gone. Like a dousing of cold water, Snape's fiery anger abruptly froze. Involuntarily, he clutched his left arm. The mark was still there, faded but never gone. Rita claims in her article that young Harry vanquished Voldemort, Dumbledore continued. But you and I both know that it was Lily's sacrifice. Don't you dare speak her name, Snape interrupted harshly, teeth clenched. It was unclear which name Snape couldn't bear to hear, but one thing was certain, he had calmed down. Perhaps, for him, that earlier outburst was the anomaly. Well then, Dumbledore nodded slightly. It's precisely because of that magic that young Harry must live with his blood relatives. You know, many who escape judgment might seek vengeance, and no one knows what they're capable of doing. Besides, we have no right to criticize the Dursleys, do we? I hope you won't interfere in private, especially concerning Petunia. Dumbledore fixed his gaze on Snape's face. We placed a child in their care without asking for permission, without warning them of the dangers it might bring. And, Severus, perhaps you don't know since you've never raised a child, but caring for one from infancy to adulthood is quite a troublesome affair. Enough! Snape snapped with a dark expression. As far as I know, neither have you. Oh, certainly not, Dumbledore shrugged. But I've lived many more years than you, and I've seen my share. Will you promise me? Snape took a deep breath. Fine. I can only say that word was forced out between gritted teeth. So, what did you see this time? Snape snorted as if trying to change the subject. That Potter. Just like his father. Arrogant, lawless, flaunting his powers as he pleases. Oh? That wasn't how you sounded a moment ago. Severus? Dumbledore chuckled. You were rather concerned about young Harry's living conditions? Even suggesting, all right, I won't say it. Could you just add a little more sugar to my evening potion? Dumbledore's words faltered under Snape's icy glare, colder than a winter storm. One should never anger a potions master, especially when said master controls your daily sugar intake. Actually, Harry is in far better condition than I imagined mentally. Dumbledore recalled, ignoring Snape's muttered, I'm not concerned about him. To be honest, when Cornelius relayed that Harry Potter had become an obscurial, I was truly startled. Always seeking attention like his father, Snape sneered. So, how did he cast that magic? It didn't seem like transfiguration. Even that Skeeter woman was right about one thing. Most adult wizards can't manage something like that. I don't know, Severus, Dumbledore admitted candidly. It was magic I've never seen before. Certainly not transfiguration. It was strange, wonderfully strange. It's hard to imagine a young wizard unleashing such power under pressure. You expect me to believe that? Snape scoffed impatiently. Stop pretending, Dumbledore. How could there possibly be magic unknown to you? Oh, Severus, you give me far too much credit. I'm just an old wizard who's lived long enough. Dumbledore waved dismissively before suddenly laughing. At least young Harry's tales of mushroom men and fungi folk are things I've never imagined. What a curious world. Wouldn't you agree? You actually believe that nonsense? Snape mocked. If he's not hallucinating from poison, he's just lost in Muggle storybooks. Why not believe it? Dumbledore countered. As I said, Harry is in better shape than I expected. There was no fear or panic even after the incident. His calm wasn't an act. It came from deep within, Dumbledore reflected earnestly. He's even thinking about compensating his aunt and uncle for the trouble caused. A consideration rare for a child. Cool-headed, logical, consistent in his reasoning, and most importantly, possessing extraordinary talent. Remarkable, truly remarkable talent, Dumbledore emphasized. At first, I treated Harry like a typical child, but his behavior quickly made me abandon that notion. Dumbledore stroked his beard thoughtfully. It felt more like conversing with a mature soul. I'm attuned to such subtle changes. Anyone listening would think you were talking about the Dark Lord, Snape remarked after a pause. Of course not. Harry still cares deeply for his family, concerned not only for their physical safety but their emotional well-being. Dumbledore chuckled. This time, Snape was rendered speechless, frozen in place, because, to his astonishment, he realized Dumbledore had genuinely compared Harry Potter to that man and concluded Harry was better. By the way, Severus, Dumbledore continued casually, ignoring Snape's daze, have you ever seen a Minotaur? Snape, ? For some reason, those 3 words exuded an inexplicable malice, sending a chill down Snape's spine. Is that another of Potter's delusions? Snape gritted his teeth after searching his memory. If you haven't lost your mind, I assure you, such magical creatures don't exist. Don't indulge his madness? Or are you finally seeking fellow lunatics? Yes, Dumbledore mused, his gaze flickering. Given Harry's rational demeanor, it doesn't add up. Why is that? Do you need a mental clarity potion, Dumbledore? Snape taunted. No matter your high regard, he's just an 11-year-old raised by Muggles. Fantasizing is hardly surprising for a child. Perhaps, Dumbledore murmured, shaking his head, interested in guiding him into the magical world. Severus? Without a word, Snape whirled, black robes billowing, leaving only one statement behind. I have no interest in escorting a little lunatic. Don't bother me with this nonsense, Dumbledore. As the office door slammed shut, Dumbledore was left alone. With a flick of his wand, he vanished the fallen sugar pudding and pulled out another bag of sweets, cheerfully popping one into his mouth. Ah, such unyielding children, Dumbledore muttered, gazing toward the door. Don't you think so, Fawkes? A soft trill from the Phoenix answered him, though Fawkes managed to roll his eyes before burying his head under a wing. Some things needed no words. When Harry finished his morning run and was wiping away sweat while hydrating, a knock on the door caught his attention. Go answer the door, boy, and if it's a salesman, tell them we don't need anything and to stop bothering us, came Uncle Vernon's shout from the living room. Got it, Harry replied, walking toward the door. Upon opening it, he instinctively took a quick step back, his right hand reaching toward his side as if to grab a hammer, only to find nothing there. His other hand reflexively moved behind him to grab for a shield but similarly came up empty. Right? His weapons hadn't returned with him. Who are you? Harry asked warily, staring at the towering figure before him. He resisted the urge to slam the door shut and pretend the person outside didn't exist. Judging by the size of this visitor, breaking down the door would only take a single punch. Harry's caution was warranted. The figure standing at the door was definitely not human. No human could have such massive bone structure or be this broad. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, the figure looked even larger than an ogre from Harry's memories. The being's height alone placed him closer to the category of giants or a giant subspecies, making Harry, who barely came up to the figure's knees, seem minuscule in comparison. In Harry's experience, ogres and giants were rarely associated with intelligence or kindness. They were more often known for their brutality and savagery. Oh, hello. I'm sent by Dumbledore, a staff member of Hogwarts and one of Dumbledore's most trusted people. The giant stammered as he spoke. However, he seemed much smarter than Harry's first impression of him. You must be Harry, right? The last time I saw you, you were just a little thing. Indeed, not only was he smarter than Harry expected, but the giant also appeared to have more emotional depth. Barely 2 sentences in, he already seemed moved to tears. My goodness! You really do look like your father, the giant choked up as he continued. But your eyes are more like your mother's. Time flies. And now look at you, Harry, all grown up. Thank you, Harry replied, guessing the giant was likely a friend of his parents. After determining that this visitor posed no immediate threat, Harry relaxed slightly. Are you also a professor at Hogwarts? Professor? Oh no, I'm not cut out for that, the giant said hastily. I'm the keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. Oh dear, I almost forgot to introduce myself. Name's Rubeus Hagrid. Forcing a smile, Rubeus Hagrid's face was nearly obscured by his tangled hair and thick, wild beard. Still, his beetle-black eyes radiated friendliness. Harry Potter, you already know me, Harry nodded politely. He recalled Dumbledore mentioning someone would come to deliver his parents' inheritance and introduce him to the wizarding world. What Harry hadn't expected was for the lively old headmaster to send a giant for the task. Certainly made an impression. Boy, why aren't you coming inside? Vernon's voice floated from the living room, irritated by the prolonged silence at the door. Hurry up, breakfast is ready. Don't keep us waiting. Coming, Uncle, Harry called back. It's a professor from Hogwarts. Oh, I'm no professor, Hagrid muttered, though Harry was already focused on the living room. Shortly after Harry's reply, there was a clatter, as if someone had knocked something over. In seconds, Dudley came thundering to the doorway. Wow, he's huge, Dudley gawked, eyes wide as he stared up at the towering Hagrid. Vernon was right behind him. To be honest, Harry could tell that his uncle's first instinct upon seeing Hagrid was to grab his shotgun. Thankfully, Vernon restrained himself, muttering quickly under his breath instead. The peaceful Dursley breakfast was officially ruined. It took all of Hagrid's considerable effort to squeeze through the doorway without damaging the frame. Once inside, he sat on the couch under Aunt Petunia's pained gaze, causing the furniture to groan in protest and sink noticeably. Aunt Petunia, following protocol, served a pot of tea for their guest. But that was the extent of their hospitality. In no time, the Dursleys fled upstairs as if escaping for their lives, leaving Harry alone in the living room. Dudley, however, couldn't suppress his curiosity and peeked from around the corner of the staircase. After all, giants were creatures Dudley had only ever seen in video games, usually as enemies to be defeated. Seeing one in real life was a first. "Sorry about my aunt and uncle. They're a bit scared of magic," Harry said with a resigned tone. "By the way, didn't Dumbledore mention that Hogwarts doesn't admit creatures like werewolves or vampires? Or are giants special exceptions, like minotaurs?" Harry thought it reasonable to treat different species differently in different worlds. Giants! Even with most of his face obscured by hair and beard, Hagrid's embarrassment was evident as his face turned red. "I'm no giant. Sure, I'm a bit taller than average, but I'm still human. Otherwise, I'd never have been admitted to Hogwarts. Real giants are way taller than me." "Oh, I see. My apologies for the misunderstanding," Harry said, sensing there was more to the story but deciding not to press further. It seemed a sensitive topic, and kind-hearted Tauren never embarrassed others unnecessarily. "No harm done. It's just a misunderstanding," Hagrid sighed in relief. "But wait, what's this about minotaurs?" "As you can see, I'm a Tauren," Harry said calmly, never one to shy away from this truth. "I'm pleased Hogwarts accepts non-human students like me." "Huh!" Hagrid looked even more bewildered, his mind nearing overload. "Non-human students?" He scrutinized Harry carefully, recalling the infant he had carried 11 years ago. "Right, Harry?" Hagrid shook off the confusion and pulled a wrapped box from his pocket. "Almost forgot. Happy birthday. I made this cake myself. Hope it's not too squashed." "Birthday?" Harry was momentarily stunned. To be honest, he had long since designated the day he appeared in Azeroth as his birthday and had forgotten the one from this world. No wonder Hogwarts had taken a few extra days to send someone. Harry suddenly understood. "Of course, your birthday," Hagrid beamed, pushing the cake forward. "Go ahead. Open it up. I hope you like it." It was a sticky chocolate cake with green icing that read, "Happy Birthday, Harry." Harry dipped a finger into the icing and tasted it. Too sweet for his liking. But still. "Thank you, Hagrid," Harry said sincerely. "I like it very much. As the saying goes, Tauren always reciprocate kindness with equal kindness." "Oh, that's wonderful." Hagrid wiped away tears that had somehow appeared and gazed fondly into the distance. "Cake!" Dudley's shout shattered the moment as he barreled down the stairs, grabbing a chunk of cake with his bare hands and stuffing it into his mouth. Since Dudley's parents were restricting his diet due to his weight, it had been days since he'd tasted sweets. Seizing the opportunity, he indulged freely now. "Slow down, cousin," Harry said, watching Dudley like one might observe a mischievous child, his expression oddly gentle. To Hagrid, the sight was both eerie and confusing. Hearing Harry, Dudley suddenly paused, looking between the cake and Harry before darting upstairs and then quickly returning. "Here, let's trade." Dudley shoved something into Harry's hands before continuing to gorge on the cake, mumbling through a mouthful of food. "Happy birthday." Surprised, Harry examined what Dudley had thrust at him. A game cartridge labeled Wizard's Adventure. "Guess I'll have to borrow your game console too," Harry chuckled. Dudley, still devouring cake, seemed to agree. It was an unexpected yet oddly heartwarming birthday, and Harry found it rather enjoyable. After finishing the cake, Hagrid took Harry to London. To be honest, Harry was curious. Why, as a member of the magical world, couldn't Hagrid simply apparate like those wizards who vanished and reappeared effortlessly on the street? Instead, he had to take the subway like an ordinary non-magical person. Oh, right, wizards called them muggles. When Harry raised this question, Hagrid stammered and struggled to form a coherent response. He clearly wasn't good at lying. But Harry understood. Hagrid had his difficulties. Since that was the case, there was no point pressing further. "So why do wizards keep their gold with goblins?" Harry asked while carefully examining an ancient key, his parents' keepsake that Hagrid had handed to him. From the way you described them, their greed for gold sounds just like goblins. No sane person would willingly entrust their money to goblins. It's harder to retrieve your own money than asking for their lives, even if it's rightfully yours. Banks weren't unheard of in Azeroth either, but neither the Alliance nor the Horde would ever let goblins control their banking systems. From Hagrid's descriptions, goblins here essentially held sway over the wizarding economy. Goblins? Hagrid looked startled, shaking his head. Goblins aren't just pesky garden pests. They've even started uprisings before. So wizards entrusted their economy to a greedy, unaligned race? Harry found it baffling. Or maybe he just didn't fully understand the wizarding world yet. There had to be reasons for their decisions. Don't worry, Harry, Hagrid reassured him. Though I don't much like the goblins at Gringotts, you won't have any trouble getting your money. Well, that's a relief. Harry nodded but couldn't help asking, by the way, Hagrid, did my parents leave me a sizable inheritance? I'll need a good warhammer and a shield, Harry said eagerly, and if possible, a custom-fitted chainmail suit. Speaking of which, do wizard blacksmiths craft armor that automatically adjusts to the wearer's size? Otherwise, it could be tricky to forge armor properly. The mere thought of new equipment made Harry excited. The pure joy of upgrading gear never faded. But when he glanced at Hagrid, he saw a bewildered expression on his large face. A warhammer? A shield? Hagrid stammered. Young wizards don't need such things, Harry. Didn't the letter list what you need? I don't recall seeing anything like that. I saw 3 sets of black work robes, a hat, a pair of protective gloves, and a cloak, Harry sighed. None of these cloth items offer any sense of security, Hagrid. I wear chainmail. Cloth armor would just weaken my combat abilities. In Azeroth, plate armor offered the highest defense, followed by chainmail, leather, and then cloth. Shamans wore chainmail even though they were spellcasters, as it provided additional benefits in combat. Protecting allies, enhancing them, and sometimes personally defeating enemies was part of their role. Well, there's no such thing here. Hagrid's face flushed. Why would you even think of that? There haven't been blacksmiths in Diagon Alley for ages, Harry. Don't mention this at school, or the other young wizards will laugh at you. Hagrid's expression suggested he had endured such ridicule before. It doesn't matter, Harry said calmly. Let them talk. I'll do what I must. The Earth Mother will protect me. The teasing of young wizards? What did that amount to compared to the storms Harry had weathered? As a human hero of the Horde and the Tauren, Harry was seen by the Alliance as a traitor, despite his many contributions during world-threatening crises. Most Alliance members, except a few close human friends, harbored animosity towards him. The SI-7 intelligence agency had even attempted assassinations to erase this human stain. Though some extremists in the Horde also rejected him, the Tauren always considered him one of their own. So Harry didn't care. Truly, he didn't. Long ago, he had learned to ignore hateful words and animosity, unless someone confronted him directly. In such cases, Harry would wield his storm-infused warhammer to make their heads bloom. Perhaps it would even bear fruit next year. Well, okay. Hagrid was taken aback by Harry's composure and determination, realizing it wasn't an act. He murmured, "Fearless courage, eh? Harry, you'll surely end up in Gryffindor." Gryffindor, Harry mused. Actually, I think Hufflepuff might suit me better. He recalled Hagrid's descriptions of Hogwarts' 4 houses, which were clearly colored by personal bias. Gryffindor was brave, Hufflepuff was clumsy, Ravenclaw was bookish, and Slytherin was full of dark wizards, according to Hagrid at least. Absolutely not. For the first time, Hagrid was firm. If you ended up in Hufflepuff, people would go mad, me included. Though I know you wouldn't care. Anyway, welcome to the Leaky Cauldron. Before Harry stood an aged wooden door nestled between a large bookstore and a record shop, blending into the narrow space without a sign or anything unusual to distinguish it. Harry noticed that while passers-by saw him and Hagrid standing there, none of their gazes landed on the door. More wizard magic, no doubt. Before we go in, Harry, Hagrid said, gripping the door handle. You're far more famous than you realize. Stay calm. Without waiting for a reply, Hagrid pushed open the door to the leaky cauldron. The bar was cramped and grimy. No matter how much Hagrid had praised it earlier, Harry's first impression was simply that. It was not only cramped and grimy but poorly lit. Some robed figures gathered at tables, drinking or smoking and chatting in small groups. Still, it was better than the worst adventurers' taverns Harry had visited. As Harry took in this supposed gateway between the wizarding and muggle worlds, Hagrid greeted the bar's owner. But that wasn't the main event. What mattered was that everyone in the bar stood up and rushed toward Harry, faces brimming with enthusiasm. Frankly, Harry was thankful his warhammer wasn't with him. The last time so many humans surrounded him, it hadn't been a friendly encounter. Thankfully, Hagrid used his broad frame to shield Harry from the grasping hands and forcibly guided him away. There were simply too many people.
Thanks. Waiting in next episode. Subscribe.